And so it's just awesome to hear, you know, that you can see that.
Yeah.
That,
I mean, the background in psychology definitely helps.
yeah.
Because like, I think that initially I was going into education for my undergraduate degree, and I realized that I was more interested in the development of the whole child as opposed to just curriculum work. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
Yeah, that's awesome. So as well, what was I saying that? Oh yeah. So as I was saying, social work is kind of this value-based profession, and I guess I'm lucky to be a social worker because I can be in roles every day where I'm, really living my values. And it sounds like you're able to do that
Yes.
a lot in your work too.
Yes.
So how would you say, like, how do you identify your values, and how do you live those out in what you're doing?
I think servant leadership is like a real core part of the work that I want to be a part of and that I do. Because I know that there are people who are better off than me, and I know that there are people that are worse off than me. But my main goal is to figure out how can I be of service to help someone else accomplish their goal, right? I think that I have had a lot of education that has been able to afford me the ability to maneuver through many different rooms, whether they are political officials, or if they're simply, or if they are community members. It kind of gives me the ability to see, to kind of see through the initial introduction of a person and to see what it is that they are really trying to accomplish. And I think that's why short story. That's why I didn't do well in retail. When I first graduated from college, I was working in a retail store in an outlet mall. And I realized that my main goal when I showed up as a manager was to figure out what my employees wanted to do with the rest of their lives. And it was never to work in retail for the rest of their lives. And I honor retail workers because they are the backbone of society when it comes to getting whatever we need. But when I looked at my employees at that time, I realized that there was always something more that they wanted out of life. And so it became my goal to help them accomplish that. And so I think that that's always been kind of my MO when it comes to interacting with other people. It's to get them to see what their vision is and to help them accomplish it. Because I've been able to do that in my own life. So I want everyone else to be able to experience the joy that I have of being able to go out and use my voice to make a difference.
Yeah, even in your development of how you're talking now, I can kind of see like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like these retail employees are employed. We're assuming that they're meeting their most basic needs.
Right.
And what's next on that? How do you move beyond kind of meeting those basic needs?
Right.
That self-actualization. How do you, and it sounds like you're working more in that space.
Yes.
And helping other people.
Yes.
There. I'm always curious, and I know like there are social workers out there, especially who feel the desire to get involved in local efforts, who might see things on TV and like, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I could be there. And there's oftentimes, I'd like to say like, I'm passionate about things, but I know that passion creates action, and I always don't do action, unfortunately, because I kind of get paralyzed like, oh, what's the first step?
Right.
I'm interested in hearing, like, how did you, and you've kind of touched on it, but I want to go a little more in depth. How did you get involved in the local efforts going on here? Because if I remember right, you're not even from Toledo.
No. No, I am not. So I'm from Upper Marlboro, Maryland, which is located in Prince George's County, which is one of a handful of Black counties in the United States. And so my upbringing, I was surrounded by all versions of Black people, right? And elementary, middle, high school, and even college, I attended an HBCU. I was able to kind of figure out the type of person that I wanted to be. So I was able to put on all of these different hats and all of these different personas, especially during my formative years. And so once I graduated, I decided I wanted to go to graduate school. And so that's why I moved to Toledo. And Toledo is a very interesting place because I used to always come here for like vacations over the summer and for holidays. And moving here, I was able to get a better understanding of what it was that I would see whenever I would come down for vacations. And I saw that how I grew up was not the same way that people grew up in Toledo, but I knew that it was possible, and I knew that it was an attainable goal to want roads that weren't completely cracked. It was an attainable goal to live near a grocery store. It was an attainable goal to have quality schools. It was an attainable goal to have communities that held specific ideas and did the work to accomplish them. And so I wanted to bring that same spirit of my upbringing to Toledo. And so when it came to getting involved with CSRN, I wanted to start with something really simple. So we did a Black Lives Matter scholarship. And the reason why I wanted to do a scholarship was because I remember being in college and only having a certain amount of money on my food card, right? And be starving at like 8:30 when the cafeteria closed. And so I thought about the college students who were at the University of Toledo and what their experiences were like, and wanting to make sure that if nothing else, they could get something to eat when they were hungry. And again, that goes back to the hierarchy of needs. Like, I remember studying and starving. And so when we did the Black Lives Matter scholarship awards, we wanted to highlight students who, number one, knew what the struggle was about, who understood what the Black Lives Matter movement was about, but we also wanted to reward them. And it happens way more often than it should that the people who are in most need often don't know what the first step is. Like you were talking about, like if you have passion, but you don't know how to turn it into action. If you're hungry and you're in college, but you have so many other things going on in your mind, it's really hard to get to like, what's the first step that I can do? So we wanted to make it as simple as possible. So it was just an essay contest. And we had dozens of essays that were amazing, and unfortunately we can only award 3, but in rewarding those 3, we were able to make life just a little bit simpler for the students. Because I think when we talk about movement work, oftentimes the victims of police brutality are young Black men and women, but there are families that are also involved in this movement work. And we wanted to make sure, or I wanted to make sure, and through the partnership with CSRN, we were able to make sure that the children weren't being left behind, that the needs of the children were also being fed, literally and metaphorically. And so just throughout the work that we've done, I've been able to make sure that I put my little seasoning on it to make sure that we're not leaving out other people who are affected by the state of the world, if you will.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I think, you're really inspiring on how you got involved and how you kind of stay involved. It sounds like you're talking about like these little steps probably led to bigger steps in your involvement. And I think that's a great approach for people who kind of feel like the paralyzed by the problem. Like, how do I affect change when there's so much going on and so much wrong? Just starting little by little, and that leads to opportunity and more opportunity. So that's great. And I'm surprised you took vacations here. I didn't know, I'm from Toledo and I don't hear people.
Well, my grandparents live in Toledo. My grandparents and my aunt, they all live in Toledo. And so my parents moved from Toledo to Maryland, and so we would come back for vacations. But yeah, it was an interesting experience growing up, because my grandmother has been involved in the church for as long as I can remember. So a lot of my summers were spent just, going to Bible study and going to rehearsals and going to church, and then if like everything worked out well, then we would go to Cedar Point, or I think it's called Portside, where the new ProMedica Park is now. But yeah, it was always a really quiet town, and I'm just glad that I can make a little noise for Toledo.
Yeah, great. I love Toledo. I'm born and raised here, and I think about going other places, but then I go, I'd love to see Toledo do better before I break away and spread my,
And that's what's needed. That's definitely what's needed, because there's brain drain that happens I've seen for a lot of people in Toledo, where you kind of get stuck and you don't know what to do next. And I think for a lot of people that the decision is to move, to go someplace else. But I think that there's something really interesting about Toledo, and the fact that you can make a huge difference by just having the idea and finding like-minded people to have the idea, and taking that idea, turning it into a passion, turning it into action. And you can change the world in a way that how can I put this? In a way that would often be overlooked in larger cities. You can make a much bigger impact in Toledo.
Yeah. Well, you heard that here, people. Yeah. And get on board. We're putting Toledo on the map.
Yes.
At this point, it sounds cliche, but I'm going to say it. 2020 was a rough year.
Oh my gosh.
Everyone.
Yes.
How in NASW has had kind of this focus on self-care.
Yes.
And we talk about it as, NASW Ohio leadership. We talk about it and really promote it among members. I think self-care is kind of one of those things people forget about until, they needed it, back then. But how have you been taking care of yourself during this pandemic?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so number one is therapy. I am the biggest fan of therapy. If only to have someone to talk out my feelings, talk out ideas, talk out plans with, as a sounding board. That's been my number one. That's been how I've been able to get through the quarantine and just the implosion of America, if you will, when it comes to this almost eerie global acceptance of white supremacy as the status quo. So I go to therapy. I journal a lot. Unfortunately, though, I have multiple journals. And so there's like a collection of maybe 6 or 7 notebooks that just have all of my ideas scattered through them. But it's really good to just be able to write out whatever it is that I'm thinking. I make lists. I make a lot of lists of action plans and identifying my feelings. There's this really awesome pillow that I'm actually sitting on that I want to show you. So this is my feelings pillow.
Oh, I love that.
Yes. And my feelings pillow has been the reason why I have been able to kind of maintain my own mental health, because a lot of times I've realized, especially in students, they can't articulate what it is that they're feeling. They just know what it feels like. And if you can articulate it, it makes it a little easier to break it apart, figure out how you got to that point, and figure out what you're going to do next time you have that feeling. So taking conscious steps to identify my feelings from one moment to the next is another thing that I've learned to do. And then finally, painting. I went to... Where did I go? I went to not Five Guys, Five Below. And they have these cute little like paint sets, and then you get a couple of canvases. And I didn't realize how much I needed it, but just to take time to just focus on something else, to create something. I think that's been really helpful in getting my mind clear, so that I don't get too overwhelmed, so I can just like set out a piece of time that allows me to focus on something else. So those are the main things. And then moving forward, I'm actually planning to do the Daniel fast, which is 21 days of only fruits and veggies and oats, and it's like a really organic diet. But I just want to make sure that my physical health is progressing at the same rate as my mental health. So I want to make sure I'm on track with that as well.
Great. Really great advice. I love it.
Yes.
When you, I'm thinking about the